And we're live. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Seems like everything's okay. Welcome to Lorelines. Welcome back for another week. Today we're talking about the reflections, the shards. We did discuss this topic formally before, but
it was one of our first ones.
Yeah, it's been been a long time since we've really sunk our teeth into this
2 years.
specific topic.
It's kind of crazy in a sense. Well, not in a good sense. That this month, by the end of February, we'll be celebrating Loreline's second year.
Yeah,
right.
Full 2 years.
We'll be going into our third year.
Yeah.
Pretty scary.
Third season.
Wow, what did you have to share?
Yeah, so this is completely meaningless, and I hope it sets the stage for our important discussion today. I opened 2 packs of Mott's assorted fruit snack gummies.
God.
And in that pack, I got 9 yellows, 2 purples,
I'm so sorry.
4 reds, and I guess 2 cherry. So this was not at all assorted
Somebody
properly,
quit
in my
this.
opinion. Sitting here looking at all yellow gummies. Who likes those? Can I mail them to somebody?
No, that sounds like a calamity.
It's a calamity. So this is the
This
ninth
What?
umbrella.
The calamity of yellow gummies.
Yeah, it's the worst.
The balance was tipped.
Yeah.
Why did we start with this?
Yeah, so we got the Elidibus speech. The
Without
waking sands.
the
Yes.
balance between good and bad gummies.
This is where I made myself known to you and yours.
Anyways,
The source. Anyway, yeah,
congratulations
5
on
minutes in
killing
and
me
Meowth's
out.
already
Now
dead.
we know.
it's been a minute.
That's how you know it's a good start.
Yes.
Yeah, wrong start.
Talking about gummies.
Yeah, man. All right, so I have succeeded then. Very important topic today.
I suppose the yellow would be light, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it was listing dangerously towards yellow gummies.
Still alive, Meowth?
Yeah. I'm doing
Alex
much better.
says louder.
I'm actually doing much better than Fao and his gummies.
Yeah, it's okay. They're actually pretty tasty. These aren't lemon. They're actually something else that tastes better. I don't know. Anyway. I hope everyone had a good week.
Well, whatever.
Yep,
You can
I
tell
got my
how
new
long it's been
computer
since we ate
and
gummies.
oh my gosh. Whew. I can play everything at high quality, like the max quality, and my computer doesn't sound like a jet engine.
Nice.
For today, as we were going over earlier, we're going to be revisiting the calamities. This was something that I had in the back of my mind for over a week now, and something clicked on Monday that I was like, I need to share this with the crew, and they were like, you know what, this would be a good topic for Sunday.
Yep, it's true.
So what I thought was we had a talking to from Grahatia in Shadowbringers about the calamities. We also had one from Emmett in Shadowbringers about the calamities and what they did, how the process began, how it affected the source, and we were given kind of a list of the elements, the calamities that happened. It's also listed in the book as well. The elemental alignments of the shards. So I got to thinking, there are some left. What would happen should they be rejoined?
The source
So-
would become whole, and everyone would live forever, happily ever after.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Now that's the basic answer. But looking at
Well, I'm a basic
Alright.
bitch, so that works for me.
looking at our list, and we know that they use the Esper list from 12 as a template because they use the Scions of Light for the Asians. They use the zodiac signs for the Orosites and Signs of Darkness for well, so on and so forth. But they also use the elements too. So going down the list, I had to just kind of line everything up with the shards elemental wise and just take away, and we were left with a couple of elements that have not been rejoined with the source yet. But from what we know about calamities, what would happen should they be rejoined with the source? What would happen on the source from that elemental source join, or from the elemental shard joining? Because we know that a calamity on the source is, yeah. I'll let you guys talk.
I'm going to just take a pen and paper to basically to make myself a list on the shards and on the shards that were joined and the calamities that happen and each of the elements to basically sort out which other elements between quotes could be. Oh fuck! I screw up my.
Because what Grahatia was like, if the element in question were fire, one might expect droughts on the source.
Droughts, heat waves,
Yes.
etc.
Wildfires.
During the period when
yeah.
the fire ether is actually rejoining, there's going to be an influx of that element going around the circle.
Right.
That's what
so
he's
that
speaking
was
of.
my thing. Like we've taken away several of the elements, many of the elements that were on the list. There are still some left. There are still 1, 2, 3, 4 worlds that are left. 4 elements. What would they do to the source should a calamity happen?
And furthermore, what are those elements?
Exactly. I'd like
Let
to take a
me.
moment to discuss that because after Shadowbringers 5.0 proper, I spent a lot of time trying to do the math, trying to figure out how the elements might balance once more once, the sixth fire through ice, all those, and light and darkness were accounted for. What remains? I tried the math backwards, forwards, upside down, through. I could never figure a way to get 6 elements to fit into those 5 worlds. Couldn't find a way to get the 2 polarities, light and darkness, to fit into those 5 worlds. And then this theory comes along, and it's like, oh, I was looking at this all wrong the whole time. It really caught my imagination as such.
Which is the main reason we're talking about it, even though we've already discussed it, because this is kind of a
new.
revelation.
We discussed it before, but not during this avenue. We kind of looked at an overall view of it. Now we're looking at a what if scenario.
Yep.
So maybe we should start with the obvious fact that the 13th is a failed rejoining of darkness. They decided they couldn't use it and had to change tack going forward. A perfect rejoining, a perfect ardor would be every element, astral and umbral, gets to rejoin, but we've lost a whole world here.
So going down our elemental list, we have fire, wind, death, gravity, earth, holy, ether, poison, soul, lightning, water, ice, and darkness. Darkness and death are 2 very similar, I wouldn't say elements, but similar principles that could align with 13th. But because of the flood of darkness that happened on the 13th, I would say it more aligns with the darkness element itself. Fao, what do you think?
I think there's a little point of tension here where there's 2 elemental wheels we could look at. Really, there might even be 3. There's the Final Fantasy XII elemental wheel that you're discussing that has aspects such as gravity and soul and all of that. But we also have the Urianger standard elemental chart, and we also have the chart of the 12, which just follows the elements in a circle, astral, umbral, astral, umbral.
Cobb, what do you think?
I'm still chewing on it.
I'm writing down the whole list, but I'm going to give my thoughts the moment I finish matching each thing with another with my with my illegible handwriting.
Well,
What
that gives
about
us.
Mila?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's very interesting that we've had, excuse me, that we've had 6 elements rejoin, and those are the 6 elements on the wheel. It's also, those are the more obvious elemental elements: ether, poison, soul being a little harder to quantify. And also, I think, I don't know if there's direct oppositions for those or not. Actually, I'm not as familiar with the Final Fantasy 12 stuff. Maybe someone can fill in more, but it is just interesting that those are the ones we've seen rejoined, with the exception of Light, which didn't quite get there. And these are the ones that are like the big ones.
I have a
So
hard time
according-
imagining, Amy, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I have a hard time imagining, and that doesn't mean this is wrong, but I can't imagine a shard of poison or a shard of gravity. This strikes me as so fundamentally different from a functional planetoid somewhere that I'm having a hard time. I mean, we've got ideas of like the realm of fire, where it's like a phased world in different fantasy genre stories, but I just have a hard time wrapping my brain around it, even as a
For
concept.
me, I would see it more as like these are worlds that tip toward that aspect. Everything would be present. All the types of ether would be present in all of these worlds, but the Asians are taking advantage of what seems to be a natural inclination and pushing on it and shoving it so far that it becomes overwhelming.
So rather than
That's
a
just
world of
my
fire, you have
perspective.
a world that is slightly imbalanced towards an aspect.
That's what I've been envisioning and perceiving anyway.
There's one point that I would like to bring out in terms of making sense of all this, but if you want to go first.
No, go ahead.
So, okay, from this whole list, we know that the first is not rejoined, but let's count it as the calamity of. I'm going to go into that in a
Holy.
moment. That's
Holy
a bit
would translate into light.
That's a bit complicated because Alex pointed out light and darkness separate from an Stormblood interview, which is one of my points in terms of what is actually an element, which I think it's the key of this whole thing. But anyways, the second was the calamity of fire, the third was the calamity of earth, the fifth was the calamity of wind, the sixth the calamity of ice, the seventh I think it's called the astral calamity. The 10th is water, the 12th is lightning, and the 13th is the void. And it's interesting that the 13th is the void, and the 7th, which is depicted in the ocular as per the Exarch's hologram, as in darkness. So there's a fundamental difference between the 7th calamity and the flood of darkness that engulfed the 13th. As setting this aside, each one of these calamities and their respective elements, they're linked to some degree to each Final Fantasy title that they represent, in a sense. So, for example, the second is fire. Have you played Final Fantasy 2?
Yes.
Have you?
Played it extensively.
The whole thing has Emperor Matthews being related to hell and the forces of hell. Even in fact, one of the first scenes in Final Fantasy 2 in pixel cutscenes is Emperor Matthews setting on fire. I don't know which village was, but there was fire and shit. So it matches with the theme of hell and the Emperor of Hell. The third, I'm not really familiar with Final Fantasy III's storyline. Is Earth? If anyone's? I know there's a floating continent, but if anyone's more familiar with Final Fantasy III, then maybe they can spot why Earth was the element chosen for the third. The fifth is wind, which is, Final Fantasy V. I think it's kind of self-explanatory, right? Then the sixth is ice, and aligns with Final Fantasy VI. The opening scene, likely with the snow and the Magitech armors and stuff. I don't know. So the seventh is interesting in that I don't see exactly. I don't see exactly. I'm not really familiar with Final Fantasy VII either. But the fact that it's called the astral calamity makes me think of well, there's Meteor and stuff, and I guess there was Dalamuth, but also makes me think of the live stream and how it's supposed to be life and activity and this lifeblood of the planet. Sort of is kind of maybe it's a stretch. The 10th is the calamity of water. I think that one is also self-explanatory too. The 12th is the calamity of lightning, which is interesting because the Ivalice depicted in Final Fantasy 12 is the Golden Age Ivalice with the airships and technology that later would become, well, it went to hell when the
Suncrest got
Middle
wrecked.
Ages. Yeah, exactly. And the 13th is an interesting.
Well, if you've seen the end of 13
Mhm.
too.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, it's the void, which is fundamentally different from dark,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
at the same time not. But then in 13, the concept of darkness doesn't really exist. It's the concept of the thing is chaos. So, and here's the thing.
Interestingly, darkness and chaos are associated in Final Fantasy 14 too. Now that you bring it up,
True, but
it is still a little unusual. And honestly, what with this new theory, I'm inclined to say that we all assumed the void was supposed to be a rejoining of darkness, and it was actually of death, or it became one of death.
I would be agreeing with that because it's also a big theme in the 13th trilogy after the great infusion of chaos, bar the flow of darkness happens, and is the mechanics are different in the 13th shard, the void in 14 and the 13th trilogy, but both share the theme that death does not exist. It's a world deprived of death in different senses. In everyone is immortal in Nova Chrysalia, while immortal, ageless, so to speak. But there's no rebirth. There's no reincarnation. No children are born. So
They don't even age,
humanity,
right?
exactly. Yeah, that's but those who survive become, well, pretty much. I mean, there's an entire death cult in Nova Chrysalia because they want to fucking die. And in the 13th, there's no death either, because the moment they die, they reconstitute. So it's and I suppose that they also have the no birth clausule there, veto clausule there. So I would say that maybe the 13th was intended to be a rejoining of darkness, but it will end up being the rejoining of death as the quote unquote element, since both things actually are parallel enough. And in fact, if as Goldbest is planning things, as far as we know, and the entire thing is basically a mass migration from the void into the source, then the 13th shard will certainly become a void in which there's absolutely no life if everyone leaves it. So there's no ether, nothing less. That would be a true void. As of now, it's only void. I don't even know why they call it void. But anyway, so yeah.
There's a little bit of contention here, though, isn't there, about the 13th? One might argue that darkness being the energy of creation and there being a huge amount of chaos would lean it towards darkness, chaos, rather than death. In fact, it's bereft of death. It's not even present there.
What if it was soul?
Indeed.
I've actually sat there and been like, what the hell
be.
could soul mean? You know, Shemhazai's associated element with that Esper.
Which
See,
is relevant
here's
because
Which is
Shemhazai
relevant.
is. Go ahead.
Associated
And
is
here was my
design
here's
of
my
darkness
hot
opposed
take.
to Igiorm, who caused the void. Yeah.
There we go.
Here was my hot take that everyone disagreed with me on early in the week. I said that the 7th and the 13th were different elements with darkness and with death. Fao disagreed because I said that the 7th Despite it being listed as either darkness or death, I said that it would have to be ether. It was unaspected. Now, the coloring in Graha's little diagram would probably say otherwise, but I went back to what Louis Swad said when he defeated Bahamut, and he exploded into a shower of ether, which revitalized and changed the landscape.
I would be inclined to agree with Yumi here because the Esper of Ether, if we go by similitude, because the Esper of Ether, Exodus, the Jotzel, Libra, in his ultimate attack is actually Meteor, which is, well, download. So I would agree with Ayumi, if only because that what Luiso has said, and by visuals and linking 12 to 14.
It basically wasn't even a calamity, yet it was, because it changed. Bahamut killed a lot of people, but it also changed Eorzea's landscape, just like the calamities did.
To be fair,
Indeed.
would kill a lot of people, but the seventh calamity was likely the less destructive from all the rest of the.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. But
Mila
it was
has
still
an
a
ad
true
here.
Rejoining. Oh yeah, no, I just wanted to say the Eorzeans see only this side. The people of Theros only see this side of the calamity, which is a whole bunch of bad shit happens, and it tends to be elementally aspected. But on the other side, on the shard side, the seventh did rejoin. So, being a mitigated and gentled calamity, it was, but it was still a rejoining, which is interesting. And I don't know. I'm thinking of in Eden when we fight the cloud of darkness, and it talks about I call forth the power of growth, boundless and irrepressible. In Final Fantasy XIV, specifically, darkness and growth are associated, which is counter to most things because usually light and growth are associated because the light gives life to plants, the animals eat plants.
Right.
That's where the life comes from. Like it makes sense, but they've done a switcheroo here.
There's also
I don't disagree with your points, Meowth. I'm just looking at it another way.
No, it's fine. I'm just making a list, and I have a lot of question marks in my list right now.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Same.
Oberon, what about you?
So I agree to a certain extent that light would. So I'm reading chat. They're saying that the aether was thinning. They were talking about that. Light would have affected people, or should have affected people, very similarly to how they did in Lightning Returns, actually. So on the first, we should have seen a slowing of everything. People should have slowed their aging. They should have lived a lot longer. And we didn't see that, which I thought was interesting. But now we're seeing that on the 13th, which is, the aether moves very quickly. It burns up very quickly because it's full of the power of darkness and activity. As far as the seventh calamity, I absolutely agree that it's very much the least destructive of all the calamities. I almost call it a soft calamity because, one, it was a fraction of time compared to some of the other calamities. We saw some of the other calamities, like the calamity of lightning, lasted over a year. Whereas the seventh calamity was, okay, here's Bahamut. 15 minutes later, he's dead. So it was very intense, but it was very short. And I think that what we saw was, because we see that Elidibus was talking about how after the seventh calamity, the realm was listing dangerously close to darkness. And that's because it was quote unquote an unaspected rejoining because it contained all of the elements, but it contained all of the elements aspected to darkness. So we saw a lot of things speed up on the source. We saw the next rejoining, instead of taking hundreds or thousands of years, it was ready within,
a couple years, literally
a couple years. Yeah. Exactly. So things were moving very quickly, and we saw the source speed up. 5 years.
That's
5 years
good joke,
later.
Zent. Good joke.
Yep.
5 years went back just like that.
Yep. And so, yeah. So that's kind of the effect we were seeing from the rejoining of that darkness is things on the source started moving very fast. We know that the source and the shards don't always move at the same speed through time, but by the time we went to the first, we had kind of dragged the source back to the light enough that they synced up. And I'm not saying that specifically because of us, because we also had the aether from the first bleeding over into the source, which was furthering to solidify that connection.
That
But
also gives credence to my theory that the seventh was ether. How do we speed things along normally? We
wait
give
for
it
them to have to.
ether.
Ah, I was going to ask
It
what you meant
reminds
exactly.
me.
I actually
It
had an ad as
reminds
well when I
me-
get a moment.
It reminds me of the term for use for limit breaks, quote unquote, in 12, which you can only do if there's mist, which is basically in bit ether, and they're called quickenings.
Cobron, you were gonna continue?
I mean, I was at the end of my point, but I was just basically saying that, you know, it's not immediately apparent what effects the calamities have beyond their surface level. So we're looking at, the rejoining of darkness. What else did it do as far as the source goes? Well, it sped things up a lot. Things happened a lot more quickly than they had in the past. Um, because I mean, if we ascribe to the time bubble theory, which I really don't, um, all of the things that have happened between ARR and Walker are basically within the span of what, a few months, which is absolutely ridiculous to me. Because I assign about 6 months to every expansion, so it's been about 2.5 years in my mind. Now I don't have any solid lore-based reason for that,
I think
other
it's
than
fair. It's not 2
it's
weeks.
just kind of it's an arbitrary time frame in my mind. But it makes sense to me. So there has to be some downtime between everything that's going on. Um, and yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
And going to Zed's thing in chat, this was another kind of point that I that I brought up too. Why would he say darkness when we already had the darkness calamity happen? That would actually be one of our first. Because if we say that the 13th was darkness, because of the flood of darkness, we can aspect it to that element. Why would he say that after, we'll say, the flood of ether or the calamity of ether happened from Bahamut? Why would he say that, oh, we're listing dangerously towards darkness? Are we going to have another darkness calamity? Where's that going to come from?
I have a sense of what's going on, which is we're having an issue rejoining the concepts of the elemental wheel versus the astral umbral light darkness way that this game has treated the elements. It's just hard to make those two ideas fit together. Really quickly, going back to the thinning of ether comment made in chat, I have a different take on the thinning of ether, actually, and it's a mixture of two things. Firstly, Bahamut wasn't fully slain because Dalamud existed. Eorzea was having all of its ether actually siphoned into that machinery, which would remove a lot of the ambient ether around the area. Additionally, because the first had already been prepped by Emmett Selk before his brief sleep, the impact of the light ether coming into the source would have caused a stilling of ambient ether, which would have been shown as a thinning through those goggles. And also, side note on the rejoining of darkness speeding up activity, how quickly things were changing. This kind of ties back to Elidibus's comments and his deep grief in Shadowbringers, because he had seemed to have lost track of our power so rapidly. Even in the time bubble world, where we're thinking about that comment, just the notion that we could be level 50 and be seen as pawns, and within 2 expansion cycles under 2 years to these eternal beings in comparison to us completely dominate them in one-on-one combat is absolutely absurd. I mean, it's kind of crazy that Elidibus needed to call souls from beyond the rift to equal a mortal's power, and then still lost. It's bonkers.
Something that has always made me just kind of confused about 14, and I know it's because if this happened, there wouldn't really be a game. But if you really think about it, all the Asians really had to do was wait another 70, 80 years for the Warrior of Light to just get old and
Just
die,
age
and then
out.
they could then they could just do whatever they want.
But the tension, the reason they couldn't is because our involvement was actually changing. The actions we were taking was actually changing the balance of power on the source, either towards light or darkness, depending on what side we're on, because that's why he grabbed us. He treated us, the words he uses are useful pawns. He's trying to get the source back to the light, but had no idea that we would just become OP overnight.
Not wrong.
If I may,
Go ahead.
One thing that is actually bugging me is I keep giving thoughts to the concept of light and darkness, and if they truly align to the elemental holy and darkness as we know, because we know that light and darkness, as we understand in these terms, they either mean astral and umbral, which are polarities and not elements. So holy and dark, as listed, for example, in 12 or in the classical Final Fantasy, elemental mechanics.
Good and evil, the war eternal.
Yes and no, because I think Final Fantasy has divorced itself from the concept of light is good and dark is evil a long time ago.
They wanted to do that in Shadowbringers. They didn't deign to do that in the first couple of expansions. You were basically the tool for the Scions. Here lies evil. It must be destroyed, as Elidibus said. And they just threw you at whatever problems they had. Whereas in Shadowbringers, you discovered light is not something that is all good. So now we need to blur the line between what is good and what is bad. It was only after we went to the first that our perception changed because of the elemental wheel.
It is an interesting back and forth because Shadowbringers challenged the concept of light good and dark evil, and then Endwalker. I'm not going to say that Endwalker went to play back on this fully, but in a sense they're still there. It's just that it's a whole different thing, because, for example, the light. If we take Hydaelyn and Zodiac as light and dark and light and darkness, they're actually more like astral and umbral. Even their weather in their trials refer to astral and umbral. I think the real fight is depicted in good and evil and the darkness and the light was it was all related to Dynamis, and I know Dynamis is a rabbit hole, but there's the whole thing between the black Dynamis of Meteon and the gold light that we see that represents hope. So it thinks like it goes more like the terms go to more like to refer to hope and despair being the real deal here, and holy and dark are entirely different things. So it's kind of mind-wrecking in that sense.
So you've opened up a little bit of a can here by bringing up Dynamis. I was going to bring it up later, but you brought it up now, so I want to address it. But in Shadowbringers, we actually learn that Dynamis is a critical component of the Rejoinings. And we learn this from Emmett Selk after he saves Grahatia's life by shooting him. Which people argue with me that he didn't save his life.
He saved his life.
but he was trying to commit suicide, and Emmett Selk saved him and stopped him. So Emmett Selk saved Grahatia's life. There's no argument.
All hail
That's Kun
gunpowder.
Makote, that expansion.
One of the things that he says is, what Vothri achieved through bliss, you will achieve through despair, both of which are emotions, which indicates to me that emotions are a critical part of the rejoinings. And that kind of, like, looking back in hindsight, I just kind of dismissed it. But now that we know what Dynamis is and what it can do, and seeing that line, it just makes me wonder, how influential is Dynamis over causing these rejoinings, and how critical of a component it is, because we know it's part of it, because the Ascians just can't say, okay, we're going to take this ether and dump it here, which seems to be kind of what Emmett Selk's plan was, to just kind of absorb all the light of the first and just dump it on the source. Um, but the fact that in order to actually cause a proper rejoining, there needed to be an emotional component of it, means that they were using Dynamis, but because the ancients were well, at least the big three were unsundered, they couldn't manipulate it to the degree necessary enough, or create enough of it to trigger that rejoining.
Plus,
You
as
know
far
what?
as we know, they weren't aware of it.
Hmm.
You know what though? It makes me think of like the first attempt at a rejoining was the 13th, and it makes me think that there, as well, Zero and the rest comment on on how things went down the sewer so fast was the Oracite, again, fucking Oracite, and and the thing that the Memoriates got greedy, and there was a lust for power, and also the fact that a great part of their power came from summoning primals by eidolons and subduing them, and for in order to summon a primal or an eidolon, a prayer and prayer bar will bar hope is needed, so that directly affects involves Dynamis. So in that case in particular, it's definitely something that was triggered by by the intervention of Dynamis, be by the prayers that summoned forth and called the primals Baradolons, or the greed of people that started to fight among each other, and war. It's another whole thing of scope of human emotions. So yeah, I would say that I will
So big.
argue that in this case in particular, definitely Dynamis had a big part, and perhaps it's why the whole thing went so bad, and the Ashen School wouldn't have been able to prevent it, because because I mean the only ancient that was aware at that point of the existence of Dynamis had forgotten about it because of the whole Kairos incident. So they wouldn't have been able to prevent how powerful Dynamis may have messed up with a careful concocted ether dumping, so to speak.
It's
So I think this. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's a lot like mixing up your Kool-Aid, getting it ready to pour into a glass, and then somebody just puts their hand over the glass as you're pouring it. The source was not primed for the 13th, and therefore the ether could not transition, and it went out of control. That's my take.
You've been eating too many gummies. Anyway,
No, but I mean, even the fact that they took the time, so to speak, they took the effort to, by the end of 3.3, why? 6.3, to show us the 13th, as in not covered by purple darkness as we're used to see darkness, but black liquid sort of darkness that reminds me much more of the Dynamis, of Black Dynamis, like as in Meteon, and also reminds me a lot of Chaos, but that's a whole different thing. But yeah.
So this actually is a good point to actually go into the topic that I actually presented, which was we have 4 elements left. We have gravity, we have poison, we have soul, and we have death, I believe.
Yeah. So
Do we have a visual asset to
It should
show?
be 5, right?
I linked the picture in
Oh, did you?
admin chat a long time ago.
Well, I mean,
I
if it's
just
not
put
today,
It's
then
in live now.
thank you. There it is. Perfect. One moment. I'm gonna change us to the other
So there
slide.
there are 13 espers, and we've had 7 rejoinings. I'm trying to do the math. That leaves 5, right?
Just a moment, Neela, because it cuts your voice out.
One was failed.
When I move over, it's going to cut your voice a little bit. It's just part of the fade out. It
Okay.
doesn't distinguish.
One
between
was
audio.
failed, and then one was prevented.
And the first hasn't been. Yeah, the first hasn't been rejoined.
All right, clicking the button.
See, nothing.
Personally, I'm figuring on each shard being assigned one of these
There we
13,
go.
whether success or fail.
But I think in this wheel, it doesn't matter if we count holy and dark, the usual holy and dark. I mean, it would match, so fine.
See on this list here, the person wrote darkness as the 7th unreal calamity, and the 13th as the void failed rejoining. Again, I would essentially put the 13th as darkness, and the 7th as ether.
Yeah, I would agree.
If you
So
also
that would leave
Either
holy-
that, the 13th is either that or, in my opinion, death.
So, in my opinion, it would be poison, it would be soul, it would be gravity, and it would be death. So, yeah, I think Iorum did this one, but anyways, yeah, because death doesn't exist on the 13th. That's right, Zent. So, anyways, what going among these last 4? What do you think would happen to the source should one be tipped too far in the balance and begin to bleed into the source?
I have to say the 13th can be death. Depends, because we name the calamities. The calamities are actually named largely after their effects on the source, and there's a lot of implication that if the entire population of the void goes to the source in order to die, that would certainly be a calamity of death, not in an exact perhaps usual way, but it would be death
in a manner of speaking, the souls coming over are coming here to die,
and it would also be the complete death of the void, as in a lifeless, in that there's no life there. Since it's a mass exile, it would be completely empty and it would truly become the void of any sort of life. So in a sense, it could take a spin on the concept of death.
What if it was a reflection affected by Medion's song more than what the source was?
I don't think so. Just because Zodiark was shielding the entire planet and all of its phased reflections, like I think Zodiark, because it was sundered with the planet, offered equal protection to the entire.
Yeah, we don't know what the status is of all of the other reflection Zodiark pieces.
Well, we do know though. We do know, however, that the moons exist. It's confirmed now.
Yeah.
We
The
know that
moons
the moons
exist.
and we know that the Asians were present on the 13th, and we know that that the developers have said that all the shards of Zodiark should have gone poof. I believe. Am I misremembering
tells
this?
us that in narrative. We know that. And it's just the exact same thing that happened to Anima, to its towers, its
Correct.
extensions of itself when we destroyed the center. the extensions disappear.
But up until Zodiark's death, there had to be a shard of Zodiark in the 13th.
Correct.
Maybe that was preventing the 13th from going. Well, going as it is going now. As
I would
things are
actually be very
happening.
curious if the Shard of Zodiark survived the Flood of Darkness, considering it is the at least a fragment of a deity of darkness, or if it was destroyed, subsumed, if it was what absorbed. Like, I don't know. I would really be curious to know what happened with that before we destroyed Zodiark's core on the source.
I mean, we know that Golbez has considered the crater on the moon his basically free real estate. So
Yeah, there's a new building there. Yeah.
We don't really know what happened actually, and because time dilation in the 13th, we know it's a big, at least it's a big difference of time dilation, or was I guess, between the 13th and the source. But
I have a bit of a tangent that just came to mind, and I'm sorry, I hope it doesn't take us too far off track. But what do we make of the fact that right after we finished off Rubicante, we have the cutscene with Golbez on the 13th moon, and all of the void clouds that we've seen that are fundamental to the 13th seem to dissipate not just from the moon but from the planet as well. What has happened here? Have the elemental fiends? Did they have enough ether that when they died on the source, the clouds? I mean, what is going on here? This is kind of
Dramatic
trippy.
effect.
I know, but
Dramatic
it's not.
effect.
They're not going to suddenly
I mean,
be
it could
back.
be.
This is a choice they've made, and so they're going to stick with
Golbez
it.
sucking up all the ether.
Is he sucking up the ether, or is it just going?
I don't know.
Is it
Just
fizzing
guessing.
away? Is this actually a method of properly rejoining? I mean, that seems to be what's in canon right now. Everybody's
If
trying
it
to come
were-
here to die.
If
If
it
you take
were
all the ether from the shard, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Meowth.
No, I was going to say if you're taking all the ether from any sort of source, as we know that ether basically keeps dynamis at bay. So if you're siphoning all of the ether for whatever reason, the result is that dynamis is going to take over, and unchecked dynamis is basically dark matter, and it can implode, corrupt, consume, whatever. In absence of ether, so that would count as the 13th shard going poof.
Well, I do want to offer a correction here. Dynamis is actually equivalent to dark energy, not dark matter.
Okay, sorry.
Dark
My bad.
So dark matter
It's a little
brings things
complicated.
together. It's what supposedly holds galaxies together, the mass that generates the gravity. Whereas dark energy is the force that is pushing things away from each other, and supposedly why the universe is expanding. So
I messed up.
no,
Sorry.
no.
It was no
It's
big deal.
this is something
We're
that
just
I've seen.
being precise.
Yeah, this is just something that I've seen a lot of people do is confuse dark matter and dark energy, and they are very different. And based on what they're setting up in the game so far, there still is a third energy in the game that would take the place of dark matter that they haven't revealed yet. So they've established that dark or Dynamis is what was it, 68.9% of the composition of the universe, whereas Aether, because that's the exact
Like in the
composition of our universe of dark energy, which would mean that Aether or matter only comprises about 4%. So you've still got about that 20 to 23% that is dark matter that's unaccounted for.
I'm very suspicious.
So let's get off the topic of the 13th. Let's pretend the 13th
Okay.
is gone.
Okay.
I mean, it's pretty close to that.
Yeah, but let's just pretend that the other shards don't exist. We're going to be talking about the 4 other ones.
Okay. So
Let us begin with gravity. Say the gravity on the gravity element on one of the other shards, is being siphoned into the source. What do you think? What kind of calamity do you think would begin to happen on the source?
Everyone immediately gains 30 pounds.
You know what? You know what? I'm going to. I was going to say, if we're going by um, uh, each Final Fantasy title connection, as we mentioned before, gravity. I think I'm going to link it to the eighth, and I'm going to say time compression because gravity and time are related. So
God, that would be
Good
fucked
point.
up.
The time compression in 8 was wild.
Yep. Yeah, I was leaning that way too as well, Meowth. Although I'm not sure I agree with the premise. I think that would fit.
Well, it's something I was thinking about actually. I'm gonna go ahead and just step on for this moment. Speaking of gravity in these games, usually what gravity attacks do is they'll take a percentile of your health, 50%, 25. This is how I so the first boss in Eden, the very first one you fight, Eden Prime, I think it was, is does almost exclusively gravity attacks. Very, very few things are not. I know its ultimate attack where it sends you to another like galaxy and explodes the galaxy sort of visualization. The thing that came straight from 8
So did
is not
Diabolos. That's gravity.
because because I forgot and wore the previous expansion's gear in the raid once and I didn't realize it till I died to the ultimate because none of the other stuff, it was all percentile based, you know? It didn't kill me. It was very funny. My team still teases me about that and I deserve it. But it's just interesting. I'm trying to think how that would because obviously we think of gravity as, you know, the force that hold the strong the weak no, weak interaction is element. You know what I mean? It's a basic law of physics, but the way it expresses in game is a little different. So I wonder if it would be more like, I don't know. It's hard to put a thing to it, but I think it would not necessarily manifest as the gravity of the of the source increases so much as it might be a different phenomenon. And yes, Diabolo's also from he's in 8, and I don't know if he's in other games as well.
He was introduced in 8, so it makes sense that the
Yes.
references are to Final Fantasy 8. But yeah,
We can also assume that because it's gravity, it wouldn't be almost mass, but we would probably see like the thinning of things. We would probably see either mass taken away or mass given.
you made me think of the never-ending story with the void thing, like segments, and that would be creepy as fuck.
It would be, just because like you would see fluctuations of certain amounts of things. They would either get heavier, they would either get more of their original mass weighted to them, or they would have it taken away in copious amounts, and it'd be strange at first.
So
Ayumi, an interesting postulation. Oh, go ahead. I'll go.
No, it was just a point. Ayumi, distortion word from Pokemon.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting thing for you to ponder. If it is indeed mass, if the ancients were so much larger and possibly the entire planet itself larger to compensate, since everything seemed more or less to scale, what if the rejoining of whatever shard would have been gravity would have made everyone ancient sized? It's just a thought.
What if the rejoining of the immortals on the void gave us our ancient age?
I said no void.
Too bad.
Too bad.
F.
Maybe what we call
Cope.
death, in fact. Lack of death.
I'm not sure how gravity would manifest itself.
Space-time? Maybe?
I mean, maybe. So thinking on gravity though, and what causes gravity, mass. The more massive something is, the more gravity something has, which also, causes light to lens around it. It also causes time to change as far as speed goes. And I'm pretty sure that just thinking about black holes, you fall into a black hole once you cross the event horizon. From the outside perspective, it looks like you're just falling into it forever, but time passes at the same speed for you. So more gravity means time is passing at a faster rate, which would actually account for the time dilation effect that we see on the shards. And it's It's something that's interesting to think about because I know earlier in the discussion we had talked about different shards having different what's the word, densities, I guess, of different elements, and being more prone to being aspected to one or the other, which I very much think that. I don't think it was just, an even split down the middle, because I ascribe to the theory that the shards are kind of like different parts of a full spectrum that all, once you put them together, create that full spectrum. And so when you're on that shard, they are more sensitive to those areas of the spectrum that make up that particular shard. So if some have more gravity, for instance, say the 13th, where time is passing much more quickly than it is on the source. So we know the 13th is at least 16,000 years old, maybe even 20,000, whereas the Sun Ring only happened 12,000 years ago on the source. Um, then we would know that the 13th has more of a dense gravity composition than some of the other shards.
Meanwhile,
I
the
do like you
first.
tying that to the time dilation. I think that's a good call. Go ahead, Meowth. I'm done.
No, sorry. Meanwhile, the first. I'm not going to say the first is less technologically speaking, like primitive, but there's definitely sometimes. I mean, there are structures that they are really impressive, like the taluses
Hmm.
and the whole rail wheel thing. But since we've only visited the first, as in the other shards, and the 13th, which is fucked up, we don't really have references. We basically visited the ruined remnants of the most uh, the one in which most time had passed, and the one in which was the opposite side of the right opposite side of the spectrum. So we
Right.
don't know how advanced the other shards are in between, and that's
Exactly.
something really interesting because if we have an insight into one of the remaining shards that are in between, we could safely say if by time if this time thing goes from the first being the one in which time the time dilation is less pronounced, and the 13th being the one in which is most pronounced, and how that affects their civilizations. But as of now, we only have the insight of the first and the
Right.
source, and the source is complicated because it's civilization, and on the source has had different levels of advancement, and
Right.
some of them were directly influenced by the Asians, which are the ancients. So it's kind
Mhm.
of it's just kind
So
of
yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because we really don't get the impression that there was anything significant before Ronka on the first. We know that there were a lot of various tribes and settlements, but not that there was an empire or any great nation before Ronka, and so it kind of makes me think that the history of the first is only 5 to 6 thousand years old, which is very very young in comparison to some of the others that we've seen, and maybe half the age, which to me means that it wouldn't have that much gravity. And actually, Swan Guy brings up a good point in chat. So I'm applying all these scientific principles to 14, and it's extremely possible and likely that they're just taking the most basic of concepts of scientific concepts and applying them, um, and not really thinking too deeply about the ramifications or impact that they would have in universe in the game if this particular application of science were to go to its logical extreme. One example that immediately comes to mind is how Aether seems to follow the laws of thermodynamics. Um, as far as all three of them, it's incredibly consistent. They even refer to them several times, not as the laws of thermodynamics, but there's several instances where they talk about ether and what they say this is how ether behaves, and it's the laws of thermodynamics, which is really interesting to me. But if you think too deeply about, okay, thermodynamics means this, this, and this, so Aether should do this. It doesn't always do that. So it's still kind of a yes, it does follow scientific principles, but that doesn't mean that, we can't just pull something out of our ass and make it do something just because, we want to. Like Dynamis, for instance.
Mm.
Indeed.
So let's go on to another one of them, soul.
I would almost 90% associate the soul with the nymph, because Final Fantasy 9 and the whole soul rejoining between Gaia and Terra.
Yeah, the genomes in that too.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting
Interesting.
because with soul, you already know what causes a calamity. You know what happens after a calamity. The souls rejoin. So having a shard aligned with that fact is interesting.
Now, it would be very interesting if, when these souls were divided, because we know it's like that light split the source and every soul upon it, or whatever it was called. He said in the fight.
Mhm.
It would be interesting if, for some reason, they got the lion's share or a larger than normal share of the soul portion of each individual. But I don't. I'm just sitting here like, how would that manifest? I'm like scratching my head.
I actually love where you're
Unless it
going
was
with this.
specifically, unless it was specifically
So
the more robust souls of the ancients that let them perform creation magic. I
Right.
don't know.
Well, I wanted to.
It's possible.
We postulated a moment ago about what rejoining Ether would do, about what gravity might do, what death might do. I mean, these could just be sort of aspects of the full personhood of the original Aetheris, because if you look at soul and you look at ether, we know that all of the ancients are very, very dense with ether. So
Yes.
maybe the rejoining of ether would restore people to their full etheric strength. Maybe the soul rejoining would bring them to their full dynamis or
And gravity
dynamic
being
strength.
matter.
Gravity being matter, and death being
It kind
lifespan.
of fits.
Maybe these are all pockets of a full, these malformed creatures, the full version, the original.
There's
These are just
something
thoughts.
there's one thing with the soul, with a calamity of soul, that makes me think how this would manifest on the source. And I'm thinking of the whole plot of Final Fantasy 9, spoiler alert, in which the mist created by the Ifa tree, as the souls were recycled during the process to rejoin Gaia and Terra, were actually one of their side effects is that it incensed the spirit of war and strife in the people, which is why the continent mist ends up in a kind of a big war instigated by Kuja. So in that sense, it's kind of if that were true, it would have something to do also with dynamics being affected by emotions. So it would be again another calamity that involved dynamics, and makes me kind of brings to mind the whole thing about I would be going into the 13th trilogy again. But the human spirit being chaotic and made of chaos, basically. So and chaos being the source of strife. So it's kind of interesting. But I think the calamity of soul. You could also the way I imagine it, it could be called the calamity of war. I could imagine that if that rejoining happened, being basic or the calamity of conflict. Because imagine if it's as you guys said, and these souls in the nymph or whatever the shard that has the soul thing has the greatest chunk of ancient personality, and then it goes to the source, there would be lots of internal conflicts to the people living there who would be conflicting with personality with their past life, so to speak. I don't know if I'm making sense, but to me this calamity uh, would be conflict, basically. Many ways of conflict.
Yeah, Zental says something about 100 years of conflict after the Black Rose calamity. I believe that was more due to lack of resources and
Uh,
people fighting over resources and
yes.
therefore survival, instead of just becoming warlike for the sake or because something's driving them. That is an interesting thought with the mist, like because it was the souls of the Gaians that were being
Hmm.
ejected by this Aoife tree so that they could make space for the Terran souls. I do wonder why that makes him warlike. If it was like, unhappy spirits that are like, avenge us, or if it's just generic, this is what
Hmm.
happens when you shove all that out into the air. It's not supposed to be there.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, going on to another one. This one's interesting. Poison.
Poison. Going by shards, what would we have?
So we already
Fourth.
saw, we already seen something along this line, and that's with Black Rose. But this was something due to the stagnation of ether, which aligned with the first um, element of light.
This might be where
But
the theory
poison,
starts to fall apart with poison, truly. Because I can't
Maybe,
think of a
maybe
single
not.
game that has, if we're going by Final Fantasy titles like we did with 9, it's hard to, I can't think of any game that really has poison as a primary aspect in any interpretation. Maybe you all can?
One of the shards is the 11th, and I'm not an expert in Final Fantasy 11, so I'm not exactly sure as of.
We start them when we need them.
I was gonna
Yeah,
say Zent has it right. 7 kind of does with Mako.
I
true,
suppose 7
Kind.
kind of does, but we
true.
have an issue here, and I promise I'm not going back to the void for void tangent reasons. Please forgive me, Ayumi. However, with Endwalker, we now know that the 13th is kind of a hodgepodge, right? We've got Final Fantasy 3 in it. We've got Final Fantasy 4 in it. None of these really match up, and
I don't think of any kind of poison in 4. I haven't played 4, but I
no, there
don't
I would
isn't.
like to present
think.
some. I would like to
Please go
present
ahead.
another. Oh, are you done?
Well, I wasn't going to say much more. It was just to kind of extrapolate that issue because with the 6th being, it's on this chart as an ice aspected shard. What Final Fantasy has any over aspect of ice? And if we're going by video
Yeah.
games and assuming that Final Fantasy 6 is the 6th for some reason, the only thing I can think of is Narsh. So there's really not
So
a lot to go on with this.
so actually, I'm going to disagree with you there because
Please.
6 is kind of divided into two elements. The first half is fire, where it follows Terra's storyline. The
That's right.
second half is Celeste, who is ice aspected, and that's really where you get a lot of the post game and the wrap up is with her storyline. So I would argue that 6 is mostly ice, where the game goes off the rails. You're not really locked into doing any specific thing, and you really have a lot of freedom at that point. Whereas Fire is a very linear story that follows Terra and following the events of what's going on in the world.
That's a fair point, but it is sort of an interpretation rather than a straight obvious reference, right?
Right.
Because we're following who's the main character at the point of the game. So the first half of the game is absolutely Terra, but when you
Mhm.
restart in the world of Ruin, you do start as Celeste on the island, and most of the world looks an awful lot like the first does after the light has ravaged it. And
Yes, especially in
Calusia, right?
Kalusha.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So this is a
same
thing
color palette.
where you can kind of take a thread and pull it where you wish, but it's hard to know for certain if this is the correct interpretation.
So if I'm going with
Um,
poison, I'm trying to make my brain
well,
work on what I know of 11. Go ahead, Nila.
Yeah, I've been trying to
Um,
say something for a little while, sorry.
Go
I think
ahead.
poison is perhaps not the exact word we would necessarily use for the elemental force, much in the same way we look at gravity, we talk it through, and at least I came to the idea of mass. I think poison, consider the Esper in question, Cuchulainn, swallows all the corruption in the world, and then it corrupts him. I think maybe corruption is a better term for it, like that which turns something against itself or poisons it and makes it something otherwise than it is. I don't know for sure, but my personal interpretation, I would be inclined to look at the Esper and say it's more like corruption than like a straight here is a substance that will kill your body.
I think you're right on that because a lot of things in Final Fantasy, they take a lot of the actual like words and then they rename them,
Into
they
a
kind
fancy.
of twist it to their design so that it works within their universe. So
Well, they made it
poison
something that's a
would be
little
something different.
anachronistic because
I'm inclined to agree. I'm inclined to
Go.
agree with
Why don't
Neela.
let
no,
Neela
I've
finish up.
finished.
Oh, you are.
Okay. I was going to say that I agree with Neela, and I was steaming my brain over 11th Final Fantasy 11 because I can think of anything that sort of in Final Fantasy 4. But I'm kind of thinking in 11th, we would need Arden for this. But I'm kind of thinking of how it's called, of Promethean, the corruption, the areas that are corrupted in Vanadil. Because of I don't actually remember exactly what because Arden, where are you? But I kind of remember of the corruption of Promethean, and it reminds me too
Why am I on
of
screen?
We'll find out.
yeah, and it reminds me too of a more recent between quotes concept brought up in Genshin Impact in Sumeru, which is called the Withering, and it has to do with the corruption. It's basically forbidden knowledge and energy withering the rainforests of Sumeru. Because the world tree elemental is sick. That's basically and the withering and Promethean really make me think of that sort of idea of because also if you look at Kukulain's ultimate attack in 12, it basically has him poisoning or using the scorpion tail appendage. He has drawing it in the ground, and then you see the trees and everything wither on the spot. And we don't really see any kind of poison. We only see the effects of the
I was
poison,
gonna say,
and it's
technically that's a
corruption.
toxin, not a poison, because you don't ingest it.
Mhm.
Being
Nerd.
a smartass, though. Total smartass.
I mean, also I was thinking I was thinking poison, toxins, corruption, pollution. It only makes me think also of chemicals, and by chemicals, it leads me to alchemy. So maybe something that has to do with alchemical reaction, some sort of that sort of plot, maybe. It would be interesting. I mean, wasn't there one of the worlds that Medium visited that had gone dead because of external
Deadly plague
pollution?
or extreme
Yeah,
environmental.
that was
No,
the Grebulov
I was
too. They
thinking of
destroyed their
poisoning the
environment.
ocean.
True, the Gravelov.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. So yeah, I mean, a calamity of poison could be simply be a deadly plague.
It could be
or
it could be like what's the word I'm looking for? Pollution.
Mm-hmm.
that, or it could
Industrialization.
be a corruption of the elements.
True.
Oh, and
True.
the AC Gears and Arms reminds me of something I was trying to think of as well. What defines the difference between alchemy and chemistry? I mean, I was thinking the difference between poisoning and medicine is really just a matter of degree. Most
Yeah.
medicines, if you use too much of them, are now poisonous. So it's sort of a different sides of the same coin thing.
Mm-hmm. Excess. Basically, it all chalks down to excess.
Corruption of the elements makes more sense to me because as we gain more and more elements, would we be more unstable on that end?
Mm.
Kind of adding it, almost like adding things to a scale.
I mean, the
So on and so
elemental
forth.
wheel is quite well balanced, all things considered. I find it very interesting how we've got everything leads
Because we have
into itself
we
around
have
the wheel.
13 elements, right?
Whereas that, it's like, where do I stick them? I actually had fiddled with that as well after 5.0. It was like, I don't know what to do about this. Is poison just water but bad? Is it earth but bad? I don't know. At
And
the
then
time,
there's the
corruption hadn't occurred to me.
and then there's the last
Sorry.
element and the fourth. Because the
Is
fourth
death.
is
I have a feeling that is going to be one of the last expansions where
I'm
we
not.
visit
I
that.
mean, in this case, we would be either looking at the fourth being death and the 13th being darkness, or the fourth being darkness and the 13th being death. That's the
I
way
think
I
it's
see
the
it.
first one because I think if a calamity of death, if a shard of death is influencing the source, we would begin to see something similar to what Black Rose did, only no one is influencing it and things are just slowly perishing.
I was actually saying in terms of Final Fantasy connections, which I haven't played 4, so this is a question for you guys, for those who have played. Which points, which has more weight in 4's plot, darkness or death?
Certainly darkness more than death.
I would agree.
Yeah, so in Final Fantasy IV, what you have is a world where you slowly it's it's very much a high fantasy Final Fantasy world where there are airships, but most of the world is very much medieval, and only one kingdom has reached any sort of level of technology, and they're still very much using castles and this kind of village thing. And what we find midway through the game is that there are more crystals that you're collecting under the earth. You go through a mountain to get to the literal underworld. It's a massive cave system where you're at magma level with the rest of the
Run by dwarves.
run by dwarves. And there's a whole series of
Lolly-ho.
essentially umbral aspected crystals if you wanted to take a Final Fantasy XIV angle to it, as opposed to the astral above ground. There's not a whole lot of death involved. There's only one person at all who has element of death really associated with, and that's going to be Scarmiglione, the first fiend of Earth. Everything else is
It's
very
also,
much nothing to do with death at all.
It's also important to note that the main character that you play as throughout the game begins as a dark knight. Obviously, he sheds that off, but there's later things. There's this Golbez clad in the dark. That's what his theme
Clad
song
in
is called, I
darkness,
believe.
yeah.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yeah, I have the old
Something
one.
clicked with me.
Please go ahead.
You mentioned darkness, right?
Yes.
You know about Zeromus, right?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
So I'm willing to bite the bullet and say that the 13th is death. Even though there's the absence of death and we had a rejoining or a failed rejoining and had a flood of darkness, even though that wasn't its element. So let's say that darkness was on the 4th.
I would actually, my first thought when thinking of 4, I barely know anything about 4, but I know Cecil was a Dark Knight, I know Golbez is very, very associated with darkness. I know that basically.
It would line up with what Elidibus said, listing towards darkness, and that would create a rejoining of the 4th.
And moons
would make sense on that end.
And moons are technically associated with darkness in the non-evil interpretation sort of way. In terms that usually when darkness is taken as an element or that it's not associated with evil, it tends to be associated with the night and the
much
power
like in
of
Zodiac,
night.
13 Zodiac's summoning sequence.
Yeah, and so Zodiac in 14 as well, because he's in the moon.
Well, yes, true.
And he's a protective force, so there's that. So
I'm still thinking over this death thing, and to me, things like gravity rejoining, giving the mass that the ancients had much larger size, soul giving them the more dense soul, ether giving them the more dense ether. It all seems to kind of fit. And then I think of death, and I'm like, but they didn't die. They lived until they chose to return. And now I'm wondering if quote unquote death is so like there's this book that I read that's very good. I recommend it to anyone, called On the Edge. And during the course of this book, one of the children and the characters is struggling with the concept of death and not wanting to let go of loved family members and such. And he basically ends up running these simulations over and over to try and find a way to make immortality work. And it doesn't work. It causes sickness, it causes suffering because people can't die when they're sick and it spreads, causes lack of resources and they're starving, but they can't die because they're immortal. And sort of brings in the point that death does serve a purpose in life, in promoting the continuance of life instead of, getting everything used up and then there being nothing. And I don't know. I wonder if I don't know. I'm sort of just spitting thoughts out here, but I'm
So
wondering
that's
if what we call death is in fact immortality, because that would fit with the void. It's just spitballing. Obviously, the void has other stuff going on. It has these souls that cannot return to the life stream, so they cannot be reborn into a new carnal form.
If we
It's all
understand
messed
death
up.
as part of life and life cycle, which involve
Yes.
reincarnation, that would not only have something to do with death, that would directly connect the 13th to Final Fantasy 13. Absolutely, more than it already
true.
is.
Hey, it's an incredibly valid interpretation considering there's a lot of strong correlations with the 13th.
In Returns is revealed that Etro, the goddess of great decisions, trademark, sarcasm, is not the goddess of death. She's the goddess of reincarnation.
Yes, well, and you can't have reincarnation without death, which I think is a very important thing to consider. I mean, what we call death could just be reincarnation. There's some indications in the Elpis side quests that the ancients at least believe in reincarnations, and considering that Emmett Silk can see souls and recognize them, I feel like they would know.
I feel like they have scientific
some
evidence that this is the same energy, and
Yes.
it's a human again. Therefore, you are reincarnated. The end.
Indeed.
So that does lend credence to the 13th being death. And it's not just the principle of death, everyone's dying, it's the absence of death on that shard.
Potentially. It's also possible that the 13th failing means that all the death is gone, but I don't know if that fits quite as well. Actually, kind of makes me think of from Hindu beliefs. Shiva is considered a god of destruction. It's not a negative thing. It's the destruction that's necessary to precede rebirth and recreation of the universe.
Yeah, because Brahma is the one who later recreates, and Vishnu sustains, and yeah. So if we go by my list here, if you want me to go through what I
Please
go ahead.
noted, you should actually have a look at it, because it's a mess, a bit of a mess with my handwriting here. But so we will have the first, and we would correspond the first with Final Fantasy 1, and the element would be light or holy. Makes sense too, because the Warrior of Light, I guess, the first Final Fantasy character, kind of shining knight. I think it.
Elidibus did appear as the Warrior of Light, so.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a given. The second we know was the Fire Calamity, and the second being associated with Final Fantasy II. We will have Emperor Matthews and the Emperor of Hell itself. Intro scene with flames and stuff. I have to, and there's some other stuff with fire going on too. A scene, a sacred torch in order to enter. The flame that the party uses to. I don't know if it was the Dreadnought or what, something else. They used. There's so many references to fire in Final Fantasy 2. The third, Final Fantasy 3, is Earth. This one, I'm not sure because I'm not familiar with Final Fantasy 3. If you guys are, maybe you can find more relations as to Final Fantasy 3 with Earth, but we know this is a thing, so yeah.
Basically, it may refer to the earthquake that opens up the entrance to the cave in the story, but that's a minor point in the story.
Well, it's helpful because even if these aren't straight rips, we have some things, right? I mean, we have Alag, we have Emperor Zande, we have the Crystal Tower. Of course, the theme of the game is Eternal Wind, but, this is the calamity we've got, so...
Yeah, interesting, because Alag was the calamity of Earth.
Correct, yeah.
But Eternal Wind, and it makes me think of the floating continent, which is it's a kind of an oxymoron. In this is Earth, but suspended in the air. The floating continent being a big deal in 3, but The following content is something that 3 shares with 6, though, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. But anyways, this is the one that irks me the most, and I'm not sure where's the relation because I haven't played 3. So, anyways, let's just take Final Fantasy 3 Earth as face value, just because it's how it is in the.
Sometimes it's just process of elimination too.
Yeah,
Be like, well,
yeah.
everything else adds up, so that leaves Earth.
Yeah, and yeah, if you want to go check at the Crystal Tower, crystals are form of in real
There
life.
was also an
crystal-
issue with
Crystal is a form of rock. You
There
can
was
look
also-
at
well,
that if you want.
There was also an issue in 3, story-wise, so spoilers, where when you went after the Earth Crystal, you had an ordeal getting it because there was a fake Earth Crystal and then there was the real one.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe, yeah. And I actually wanted to comment on the third and Earth before because Neela said something that actually was like when you mentioned the cloud of darkness and the growth and the spreading boundless and stuff. It's and in this particular part of Eden, the cloud of darkness sprouts vines and the like plant-like stuff.
Yes.
We don't have element of plant in Final Fantasy. The closest we have is Earth.
Did you say the element of plant?
Element of plant, yep.
I said that because in Genshin Impact there is literally the element of between quotes,
interesting.
plant.
I think we would call that probably
And
life.
Joe.
In classical terminology, we would call that the element of
True.
life, not plant.
True,
That is so funny.
It's called.
True, I mean,
it's easy to line
No,
on
I love
fire.
Element of plant. I mean, plants are interesting. Not to go on a tangent, but
Do it.
they
If we
well,
want-
they,
you want
they
to
tend to
go
create their
fungi?
structure from the air.
Mm-hmm.
The trees aren't pulling up all that carbon by their roots. They're taking it out of the air, carbon dioxide, when they turn it into oxygen. That's where the structure of a tree comes from. It's just fascinating.
Damn trees and their 5G.
My 2 air plants are going to take over the world. I'm afraid.
Well, going forward, we will have the 4th, which is not rejoin. I've had here dark or death. I think we've settled mostly for darkness here.
Darkness, I'd say now.
Okay. The 5th is wind, because bards, the wind crystal, wind drakes stuff. I think that this one's pretty obvious, even though I haven't played 5. Fucking the City of Omnia.
Sense.
And Record Keeper. Final Fantasy 6 with the 6th and the 6th Calamity, and it was ice. The 7th, I think we've basically agreed it was ether. The 8th with basically consider gravity because time compression, space-time, shenanigans stuff. I think that was basically.
Yep.
It's basically has a quotation mark here, so it's basically because it's one of the non-rejoin shards, same as the nymph. We basically commented on soul being the
predominant
quote-unquote element. The 10th was rejoined, it was the calamity of water. The 11th with basically process of elimination bar Promethean associated with poison. The 12th was the calamity of lightning, and the 13th, the void. I think we've mostly settled on death. So we will have the entire whole thing, and associated tied with shards by speculation, and those we already know by
I think this is a good overall summary of them.
Yeah, so I would say that it's actually. I would call this a productive session.
I would, yeah. No, this.
None of this
I
is
think this
canon, but
lays
it's a
out
good good discussion and interpretation we're going for.
No, I think this lays it out pretty well, and all of this spurred from just a thought I had earlier in the week.
You should.
It's a good thought.
You should have more shower thoughts, Ayumi.
I did when what was it? Lunar Cry happened. What, a year and a half ago? I'm still waiting for that to happen. If it does, I'm going to be screaming on the next episode.
Yeah, I mean, it probably
So-
should happen or something like it. And we still have this question of ethics. Like, what are we actually going for in the story going forward? Will we be fighting off the void like usual, or will we be trying to actually get this thing to work
Are we
out?
going
What's
to
going
get
on?
invaded by more shark people? I mean, the void is not highly news because Eorsi already the source already knows of void gates and the void sand. But what would happen if other shards suddenly decides that yeah, we don't really want to be left here to die, basically. So that's another
I
Gosh, I
thing.
wonder why.
I would love to see this story make this with the 13th to be a kind of turning point in the
Haslo
ethics
has what I have in my head.
the ethics of the Scions in general. With the Paragons gone, you would think that we wouldn't be trying to pick up their mantle, but in the case of the 13th, where most of the population really just wants to reset, maybe it would be ethical to find a way to perform the art, or at least with that shard.
Hmm.
It's just a thought.
Yeah.
I mean, this might be the one example where, yeah, all right, come on over, guys.
I think it's an interesting counterpoint that you bring up, Fal, to the argument that the science, and I like when storylines challenge the main character's philosophy, because usually we're kind of used that the main character's philosophy is like the right side of view, but I really like something in 14 that it constantly challenges this, and Shadowbringers did it great. I was kind of missing that on Walker. So this thing that Gestola and Alfino argued with Amatzelk about the genocide of the shards in order to basically save the Thurs and the loss of millions of lives in each shard. But what happens if the people of one shard come together and all agree that they want to be rejoined?
Did we say earlier that the Zodiac shards were joined at one point, or are joined by something?
Well, they are one entity that is phased across all of the reflections, and when we killed the source of Zodiac, all of those would have also dissipated. I wouldn't say they were rejoined so much as disappeared.
It went.
They couldn't exist on
They
their
couldn't
own.
exist
They had
without
to have that
the
core
tether
there
to
still.
the prime entity. In other words,
Yeah,
if you
and
destroy the
there's-
source, you don't end up with 13 planets. You end up with nothing.
Exactly.
Which is why
It's a
Elidibus
very
decided
strong
to
indication.
push us away from darkness. We could not risk ruining.
If there was this flood on the source, it's not that you can't rejoin it. It's that the shards are going to go down.
Correct.
It's interesting that they settled this precedent in Shadowbringers in this particular. I'm not sure if this was in this particular conversation or later on in Emetzel's exposition that the source can exist without the shards, but the shards cannot exist without the source. And then we have in post Shadowbringers and then Walker, first the towers with Anima and then Zodiac, and it's basically the same thing but in different levels of scopes, and that's something that 14 does really well in terms of settling a precedent that later is going to be relevant in some other way. But yeah. So I was going to say something, but I don't recall what I was going to say.
Gobron, you've been quiet.
I have been. I'm listening.
Are you enjoying the stream, Cobran?
No, I am. I'm just kind of
Taking
chewing
it
on my
all.
thoughts right now in a bunch of what ifs. Like, what would it look like if there were a rejoining of poison? Would like all the water turn to poison? Like, what would that look like on the source? And is it necessary for there to be a calamity on the source for there to be a proper rejoining? Because we know Emmett Selk's plan was, to use this as a mule for ether. And if Galvez winds up doing the same thing and just kind of dumping all this ether into the source,
Just
what's that going to look
bypassing
like?
going directly to jail. I
Right.
will
So
say the reason there seem to be calamities. I'm sorry. Do you need to go on?
no, I was just one quick thing. You've got the soul and memory ether coming over, but none of the corporeal ether, and how's that work?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, it seems to be the calamities are caused by the source getting over aspected toward these things. So it could really manifest in any number of ways. But I assume something would go bad when the actual breaking point occurs and all of the ether dump of that shard dumps in. But it's difficult to say, like, I don't know, does everyone get horrible growing pains when they grow like twice as tall? I don't know. That would do you remember having growing pains as a kid? That shit sucked.
I didn't
Nope.
have any, but I know
don't-
children who
I
have.
hate you.
It's true. It actually does hurt when your body's. This is a thing in real
Yeah,
life.
your growth plates are doing all that nonsense.
Yeah.
Hmm. The thing is that we're kind of we're kind of pondering world source breaking calamity, so to speak, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a localized disaster, just like the Seventh Thunder calamity was, and that was enough to rejoin a shard. So
Agreed. And there could actually be some sort of scientific basis to this, because when you have originally, right after the Sundering, you've got 14 worlds, and the source is still massive and bigger in the prime entity. But as you go around the circle, presumably the world gets bigger and more whole, and each rejoining becomes less and less impactful, perhaps. Maybe that's a thought that they're pursuing.
Yeah, now I kind of want to look back at the rejoinings once more and see if they were like really rough at first and kind of taper off to the seventh, or if the seventh was just suddenly not bad out of
It's hard. It's hard to know. I mean, we know the one that
that's the problem.
even before the seventh, the flood of the sixth Umbral calamity was disastrous, yes, but it was very localized too. Like, we know that
Charlian's, well, what became Charlian's figured out it was coming and took action. Sorry,
I mean, they had to take a space submarine to escape.
Yeah.
So it's
Yes,
pretty bad deal, pretty big deal.
But it was basically it was largely localized in Eorzea, not the rest of the continents, if I recall correctly. Because, for example, the third Umbral calamity, which was the earthquake, we know that it almost reached at least as far as Bosnia, which is Ilsabard. But the flood.
Yeah, it's not so destructive. I mean, we do know that there were serious droughts. It's in the I don't have time to pull it out, but there is actual text on the various calamities in the encyclopedia that describe what it was like and how extensive it was, and it's hard to say
because that's very much got the weight of myth rather than hard scientific. And this took exactly 384 years.
And as we've said for years, it is Charlian propaganda. And what we mean by that, for any newcomers,
2 years.
For any newcomers, is that essentially these books are in canon, written by Charlian, and what we have is their best knowledge at the time, which frees the developers up to retcon whatever they see fit and frame it as, hey, the state of science is always moving forward. And that's very convenient, and I love it. It's just enough to not make me upset about it whenever they retcon.
I mean,
it's perfect.
It's fair.
This is the book we've got, and that's what we have. So.
But one thing is interesting, is that basically, I don't know. I can't recall how widespread was the calamity of wind, how widespread the calamity of lightning, and the calamity of fire. What was first, lightning or fire? I don't recall. I think it was lightning.
Wind was first.
Lightning. It was wind,
I know
lightning.
Wind was first.
Oh,
okay.
Wind, lightning, fire, earth.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question. Sorry.
Okay, it's fine. So, but we know that the earthquake extended up to Ilsabard. Then the ice calamity, I don't know how far it reached.
That was worldwide.
I was going to say, I imagine it'd be worldwide, much like an ice age, basically, is what I recall it was.
Mm-hmm.
So less severe at the equators, but still colder there. Okay,
so the flood was mostly Eorzea localized, and then of course the Bahamut thing only happened in if all of Eorzea, but likely, but even so, it's kind of widespread throughout Eorzea, with the 0 point being Cartenon. So basically, I think the real thing here is that Eorzea seems to be the America of movies in terms of natural disasters. If
Yeah.
or alien invasions, or meteor drops. If some catastrophe is going to happen, it's going to happen in Eorzea. It's like the USA in the movies, basically.
Disaster magnet.
And
I
that's
think
not
that
wrong.
has to do with its higher ethereal density. The location of that silver tier lake, maybe it may be that the conduit to the shards goes through there, and that's why everything hits the Eorzea harder, and why it has more etheric density.
Well, the gods are there too, so I guess that maybe have something to do with that.
Yeah, gods.
Well, it's almost time to close up
Though,
shop here.
yeah.
It's nearly time. And this has been a productive and fun discussion. I'm still on the fence about whether they're actually using the FF12 wheel at all, because we do have them in order of the 12. We've got wind, lightning, fire, earth in that order. And so it seems because they messed up the 13th that they had to change gears. But it very much seems like the original plan was just to go around the wheel and not take into account light or darkness aspect at all. But
Like I'll say, it doesn't add up with just the 6 elements. It doesn't add up with the two
It's true.
polarities.
They
It
went
doesn't
in
add up,
it doesn't add up. The numbers. You're
which
right.
made me crazy.
It's true.
So
It
I
went
like
in
that this
the.
element does.
It's true. It went in clockwise clockwise um earth
Oh, yeah.
elemental wheel fashion.
In the direction that each gives rise to the next, which makes sense considering that the failed rejoining of the 13th aspect of the first toward light sucked all the darkness out, as it were, sort of, or whatever it actually happened to be.
True. I
But
mean, it's kind of curious because if they wanted to have gone completely clockwise fashion, maybe they should have started with lightning. But I understand that it was basically going from the first polarity on the wheel. And anyways,
It's interesting, Meowth. The
Mm.
Calamity of Lightning is the first one that man had record of. We only know about the wind from the Mughals.
True. That's
So that's just funny.
Kupo.
that's also true. Yeah. But then, it seems to me though that checking the whole elemental things that correspond fairly enough with Final Fantasy 12 Espers and elements, so to speak. There's the classical elements plus holy and dark. If you want, I don't know exactly in which game they started to fully acknowledge them as elements. It's kind of being a wobbly subject because in some other games, holy and dark don't exist as elements and just concepts or basically unexpected things. I mean, even 14 doesn't have light and darkness or darkness elemental damage. It just calls him unexpected. So it's kind of interesting that we could basically take six of the classical the classical elements like fire, earth, wind, ice, water, lightning, and then the other half would be not. I was almost tempted to call it concepts, but at the same time I would call it like more consequences or
Non-elemental
sub aspects of
laws,
the elements.
It's a hard one.
It seems to be divided between the material and I mean, I'm going to go full 13 and go and call them the physical and the unseen, because you don't see gravity, you don't see soul,
intangible. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. You don't see death. Poison as corruption. You don't really see the corruption. You see the effects of corruption. So, yeah. So, ether is also a non-seen largely thing. Even, I mean, it's usually when we call something ethereal is because it's almost belonging to the non-seen. So I would divide this in the Final Fantasy 13 fashion between the physical, which would be the elements, and the unseen, maybe including the polarities here, since you don't really see polarities either. You see the effects. So
They're
yeah.
sort of liminal. Like you can see light and darkness, but you're not seeing the effects. Yeah, I agreed.
Hmm.
Sort of like yes and no both. Well, you know, like you have the physical ones, you have the intangible, and then you have this in between that straddles it.
True. I mean, even though it's not really a 50-50 because there are 13. So ironically,
Yes.
there are 13. There are 13. So you can't do a perfect split. There's an odd one out, and I'm not really sure which would be the
Or
odd one out here. I
there's
think
a
the odd one
14th
out.
unknown one.
I think the odd one out in all of this is death, in terms of being like because if you take 12, you can split it in 6 and 6, and you could take 6 physical things and 6 unseen things. But death is kind of like the bridge between those things, between the physical life and the spiritual life. So I would put that as the odd one out. This is just me rambling. Forgive me.
It's fine.
I personally favor the idea of a 14th unknown one that hasn't been discovered, but that is just a little silly.
Dynamis.
Oh my god, I hate you, but you're right. I can't say anything to that. It works too freaking well.
Yeah, it's 6 times 2 plus 1. Yeah.
Dynamis as if you can call it,
or a 6, 6, and 1, and
the
then
element,
the 2 in between.
the element of emotion, so to speak.
Emotion, yeah. I mean, it's not literally emotion, but it affects emotion, and emotion affects it. It's close enough for our purposes.
Yeah, I would go into Dynamis being the element of, I was going to say will, but will also chalks to hope, also chalks to the absence of will being despair. I think Walker already touched on this.
With death being possibly more than just death, possibly rebirth, possibly more than that. I think you could go with will as, obviously like a weak will versus a strong will,
Yeah.
I've kind of thought of Dynamis as will before too, so I like that.
Well, this is a good stopping point. We went a little over today, and that's just fine. Let's think about what we want to talk about next week, and we'll see you here same time, same place. And as usual, for those who are new to the stream, please check us out every Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern. If you're viewing this after the live session, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share, and comment. You know all the things. I'm going to link the Discord in chat here. I see we've got AC Gears saying emotional damage. Yes. And any other closing statements from the crew before we shut down?
Thanks so much for coming out, everyone. This was a fun
thank
session.
you. This is good.
I'm actually surprised that I think this was a good episode to welcome back my microphone from convalescence. So.
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting story actually. Apparently, where Meowth lives, they repair $100 mics.
Yes.
You would never see that over here in the States. Everyone throws their garbage mic away. They actually fix stuff over there. How about that? You only had to pay like €20, right?
What? Oh, I don't actually recall how much I had to pay. I think it was €15.
Yeah, you see? Fix stuff. I'd like to see more of that over here. Right to repair, am I right?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm kind of, I was like, question marks over my head when you asked me if they repair, because all my life, whenever some gadgets broke or something, first things we do here is bringing them to a computer workshop or anything, and be fixed, and that's that. You don't have to replace the entire whole thing just for a minor malfunction. So when you ask, I was like, what? of course, of course. First thing I would do is bring in my microphone to the local gadgets workshop.
it's
What
brilliant.
do you guys do?
Well, it mostly ends up in a trash heap usually.
Like,
But anyway, I was wrong about next week. I think Cobran has mentioned that we do indeed have a topic. Are you still here?
No.
You've gone. Darn.
Yeah, I'm not here anymore.
Darn. Been absorbed into the crystal tower.
Yeah. No. Next week we'll be welcoming back a couple of guests, including Rook, and we will be discussing LGBTQIA inclusion within the lore of Final Fantasy XIV.
It'll be a very fun topic.
Got a hell yeah in the chat. All right,
Yeah.
everybody. So look forward to that. We're going to close out here. And as always, I had a blast. I hope you did too. And we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
thank you.